Hi folks, and welcome to the Office of Graduate Studies video on copyright issues in your thesis or dissertation. Now, a lot of you folks are going to want to include an image, a figure, or a table, or something like that in your document which you did not create yourself, such as the very first self-portrait that was ever taken by Robert Cornelius, or possibly Jeff Widener's Tank Man image of an individual stopping a line of tanks at Tiananmen Square, or even the Pillars of Creation taken from NASA's Hubble telescope. Using figures and tables and images and other things that have been created by other individuals is a great way to get a point across that you want to make, improve the clarity of your argument, or enhance your document. And while all of these are valid reasons to include the item, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can include that item, because the item is likely under copyright protection. For example, out of those 3 images we've just seen, you could use 2 of those images without receiving copyright permission, but one of them you would have to get permission to use. Now, you see your faculty using images and stuff from other people's published works all the time in the lectures they're giving and in their meetings with you. And you can probably bet that they haven't asked for permission for every single one of those. So you might wonder how they can use it, but you can't. Well, there's a fair use doctrine which allows faculty to include items like those in their presentations. However, this rarely applies to dissertations or theses, and certainly to publications that you might make later. So it's better to err on the side of caution and just obtain permission for the items that you use. This is especially true as graduate studies does several different reviews of your thesis or dissertation prior to approving it. And one of those is to check for the use of copyrighted images. Including a copyrighted image without the appropriate permission is likely going to result in your document being returned, and it may even delay your graduation, and nobody wants that. So take a look at all of the images that you're using and make sure you have the appropriate rights to use those images. Now, the good news is that there are many images and figures and other such materials that are not under copyright and are free to use, or what is called being in the public domain. The most common reason why an item might be in the public domain and not copyright protected is the age. If the image, figure, or table you want to use was published prior to 1924, you don't need permission to use it, as it is considered to be in the public domain. For example, the famous image of Vitruvian Man was published by Leonardo da Vinci in 1490. Clearly before 1924, so it falls in the category of usable images without permissions. Similarly, Robert Cornelius's self-portrait was published in 1839, so it is considered to be in the public domain and free to use as well. So that means it is one of the 2 images you could use without getting permissions. However, if you used a modified version of the Vitruvian Man, such as the image from Keith Prossick, you would need to obtain permission for the individual who holds the copyright, because it was made much more recently. This famous image by Alfred Eisenstadt was shot on VJ Day in 1945, so considerably after the 1924 date. So would you need copyright permission to use this? The answer again is yes. Anything that was published between 1924 and 1978 is considered copyrighted for 95 years since the date of publication. Now note, that was the date of publication, not the date of creation. So for example, in this photograph of Queen Street in Toronto that was taken in 1924, but it was not published until 1930. So based on its date of creation, it would be free to use, but because its publication date was 1930, it would not be in the public domain and free to use until 2025. So you need to make sure that you know when the publication date is, not just the creation date. So now, what if you were a graduate student in art history and you wanted to use a picture of Mona Lisa? Well, one would assume that it would be free to use because Da Vinci died over 500 years ago. You can't get permission from him. It's certainly from before 1924, so you should be able to use it. However, in this case, there's still likely to be a copyright for the image of the photograph that you would want to be using in your document. In this case, the copyright owner is Alame, as you can see from the watermarks all over the document. So you would still have to get permission, not from Da Vinci though, but from Alame. Okay, so far all we've talked about are things which seem really, really old, things that were published before 1978. But you're a modern, up-to-date researcher, so you want to use things that are newer, more recent, things that have been published since 1978. So what's the status of those? So for example, with this image of Tank Man from Jeff Widener, which was published well after 1978, is it free to use? Well, of course the answer is no. The change in the copyright law here, though, is that anything that was published from 1978 onward is under copyright protection for 70 years past the life of the creator. So after the individual has died, all of their work is still copyrighted for 70 more years. Okay, so what can you actually end up using then? Well, there are a lot of categories of images that don't require permissions to use, and some of the best sources are from the federal government. Images such as this from the Pillars of Creation. This was created by the Hubble telescope and is the property of NASA. And federal government images typically are not copyrighted. Now, state and local government images are likely not in the public domain, so you probably will need permissions for those. You should still check it out, but the default assumption should be that state and local government images and works are not part of the public domain and will need permissions to be used. Another set of documents that has free images to use where you don't need permissions is in the Creative Commons area. Documents that are published under Creative Commons license allows free use of all parts of them in other people's works without needing to obtain permission. Now, these documents are usually labeled as a Creative Commons, or you might see the CC logo somewhere on there. But you have to realize that open access is not the same thing as a Creative Commons license. Open access just means that you can access the work, that is, read the work, without having to pay for it. Open access is not the equivalent to a Creative Commons license, and don't get the two of those confused. You are still likely to need permissions for an open access piece of work. You won't need permissions for Creative Commons work. Okay, so you have decided that you want to use a figure, table, or image, but you didn't make it, but you still think it's important to include it in your thesis or dissertation. So how do you go about obtaining permissions? Well, most publishers will have a part of their website devoted to obtaining permissions. You'll want to go to the website of the journal or the publishing house, and in the search function, type in the word permissions. So you've decided that it's important to include that figure, table, image, or whatnot in your thesis or dissertation, but you didn't make it. So how do you go about obtaining permission to use that image? Most publishers will have a page on their website that's devoted to obtaining permissions. So what you're going to need to do is go to the search function, type in the word permissions, hit enter, and it will quickly return what you're looking for. Reprints and permissions. Welcome to our reprints and permission guideline page. So once you're there, click on it, and there will be a set of instructions that will tell you exactly what you need to do. There's probably going to be some forms to fill out. Fill those out, submit it electronically, and hopefully you'll have things within a few days to a couple of weeks at most. Now, the images I've shown you here have been from a journal called Science, but it's very similar if you're going to want to work with something like Publishing Book House. Here we look at one for Penguin Random House, and there's information on how to obtain permissions from this one. Now, once you've received the permission, the Office of Graduate Studies still needs to know that you have those permissions. So you're going to have to include a copy of that document that's granting you permissions as an appendix of your thesis or dissertation. Now, that's also going to be true if you use something with a Creative Commons license. So if you include an image or figure that's covered by a Creative Commons license, you're going to need to include that Creative Commons license in the appendix as well. For every image that you have, you need permissions. You can't get blanket permission for an entire article or an entire book. You have to ask individually for each image that you're going to end up using. And in all cases, you must cite the source of the image when you use it. And this is especially true when it is a government source. So there is no permissions page or Creative Commons license for federal government documents. So when you include the URL of the source of the document or you include the citation for that document, make sure that it is clear that it is a federal government source. So a quick summary. Everything before 1924 is in the public domain and you can use it without worrying about copyright issues. Things that were published between 1924 and 1978, copyright protection extends for 95 years past the date of publication, not the date of creation. From 1978 to the present, copyright protection extends for 70 years past the life of the creator. So that pretty much means everything is still copyrighted that has been published since 1978 to the present. Permissions and Creative Commons licenses must be included for each image or figure or table that you include as part of an appendix in your document. So the last thing is, if you're more interested in looking at copyright law, you can look at it from the federal government on what the law says. If you have questions about it with respect to your thesis or dissertation, get a hold of us at cgsforms@cmich.edu through email or call us at 989-774-3873. I hope that this has helped in the preparation of your document, and the Office of Graduate Studies actually looks forward to reviewing your document. We really do enjoy doing this. So, looking forward to seeing your work soon.